Welcome to American Revolution Lesson 10. Our objectives for today. We will learn about cause and effect through a famous moment in history, how a tax causes a famous moment, and the effect that moment has on Parliament and King George III. I mentioned at the end of our last lesson that there was soon a big event that would cause the Committee of Correspondence to have something to write to each other about. That big event is coming up, but let's talk about what leads to that event. Tea. The British Parliament came up with what they thought was a great plan related to tea. In 1773, they passed the Tea Act. Here was their plan. They lowered the price of tea so that it was cheaper to buy that than the Dutch tea that was being smuggled into the colonies. Seems like a smart idea, right? I mean, who doesn't want to buy things for a cheaper price? The problem was that even though they lowered the price on tea, there was still a tax on it. When you added the new lower price of the tea and the tax together, the total was still cheaper than the tea that the colonists were buying from the Dutch. Parliament figured the colonists would see it as a bargain and buy tea again from the British merchants. After all, it was cheaper. And when they bought it, they'd be paying the tax to Great Britain. Soon, 2,000 chests of tea were loaded aboard British ships bound for the American colonies. But this shows just how poorly Parliament understood the colonists' frustrations. This was a matter of principle for the colonists, not about money. This was still taxation without representation. The colonists would not pay that tea tax, no matter what the price of British tea. And the Committee of Correspondence swung into action and exchanged letters about what was happening. News spread throughout the colonies. In several ports, including New York and Philadelphia, the Sons of Liberty stopped the British ships from docking. Some ships dropped anchor in harbors and just waited. Others turned around and headed back to Great Britain. But in Boston, things went differently. 3 tea ships had entered the harbor. Citizens were demanding that the governor of the colony order the ships to leave. But the governor refused. That is when colonists took matters into their own hands. On the night of December 16th, 1773, a group of Sons of Liberty dressed as Indians and rowed out to the tea ships in the harbor. They boarded the ships and dumped every chest of tea aboard. 342 chests of tea into the cold waters of the harbor. They did all of this in a very quiet, businesslike manner, even sweeping the decks of the ships and putting everything in its proper place before leaving. But it was not a secret mission. Many people knew it was going to happen, and they showed up to watch silently as the tea from the ships were dumped into the harbor. The event became known as the Boston Tea Party. By the way, those 342 crates of tea were valued at about $15,000. A lot of money in the 1770s.
Hey guys, it's Sam Adams. Thanks to King George, it's tax season in 1773. Yeah, that's right. He's still taxing our beloved tea. Can you imagine getting taxed on something that you love, like ice cream? Anyway, in 1770, we managed to convince the British Parliament to get rid of the other nasty taxes, the ones on paint, glass, and lead. But they kept the worst one, on tea! My fellow colonists are not amused. Yeah, we've reached our last straw. After years of being taxed on tea, King George and Parliament have recently decided to prop up their crony company, the East India Company. Not like we colonists were struggling with money problems. I mean, think about all that money we lost from the tea tax. The East India Company was the only one who could sell tea in the colonies. Unfair, right? New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston all did the smart thing. They canceled their tea shipments. But not Boston. The loyalist local Governor Hutchinson insisted that all tea entering the Boston harbor must be taxed. Typical loyalists. We Bostonians were having none of that. Now, a great organization called the Sons of Liberty. Yeah, I'm the founder, aka head honcho of this awesome group. Decided that we need to act. Previously, we had protested the Stamp Act in 1765, but now we had to protest the East India tea monopoly, plus something that we've all heard by now. No taxation without representation. And we were successful in protesting in every colony except Massachusetts. The governor, though, would not back down. And neither would we. In late November, the ship, the Dartmouth, arrived carrying a ton of tea. We were furious and demanded that the Dartmouth captain sail back to home. But he refused. Why? Because we weren't going to pay those tea taxes. We had to act quickly and take drastic action. So on December 16th, a bunch of us got together to decide our next steps at the old meeting house. Just look over there. My fellow patriots are furious. Good thing King George isn't here because it would get ugly. This turned out to be a critical day in history, with the colonies taking a defiant stand against British rule. I just got news that the pesky Governor Hutchinson wouldn't let the Dartmouth and the other ships carrying tea sail home. Well, I decided we had to do something. And soon. I announced, this meeting can do nothing further to save the country. And within 10 or 15 minutes, people poured out of the meeting and headed to the harbor to take action. Man, everyone was fired up. Look at those guys, and they're wearing Indian costumes. Our fellow colonists managed to dump over 300 crates of tea in the harbor. Oh boy, here comes trouble. I may or may not have been involved in the tea party. You'd have to ask George over there to get the truth. But I did immediately get to work talking about it and defending it. It wasn't a lawless mob. We were principled protesters defending our constitutional rights. Colonists like John Adams, my beloved cousin, and others began to jump on board. We all started giving up tea, calling ourselves patriots, and realizing that it might just not be possible to get along with the British anymore. Plus, after the Boston Tea Party, the British just had to make things worse. Instead of removing the taxes we hated, they shut down our port of Boston and sent over 1,000 soldiers with the coercive acts. We refer to them as the intolerable acts. What in the world? We're not the enemy. We're supposed to be part of the British Empire, but maybe not anymore. You can say that the Boston Tea Party was the critical event that sparked the American Revolution. See you next time.
So you just heard from Sam Adams the reaction that Parliament and King George III had when they got news of the Boston Tea Party. They were outraged. That does it, they said. We are going to teach these colonists once and for all who makes the rules in this empire. And then Parliament passed several laws to punish the people of Boston and the whole Massachusetts colony. One law closed the port of Boston until the colonists paid for the dumped tea. That meant no ships could go in and none could go out. Now, for a city that depended on trade and fishing, this was a severe punishment. Another law took away most of the Massachusetts colony's right to self-government. The British appointed an army general named Thomas Gage to be the new governor of Massachusetts. They also sent several thousand more troops to Boston and ordered the colonists to put these troops up in their homes and to feed them. Parliament and the king referred to these laws as the Coercive Acts of 1774, thinking that the acts would coerce, right, force the colonists to fall into line. But the colonists called them the Intolerable Acts, thinking that they could not tolerate or endure them. They said Parliament and the king were trampling on their rights as Englishmen, and they decided to stand together with the people of Massachusetts. You will hear how the colonists stand together against this in our next lesson. So, looking at our objective for today, we learned about cause and effect through a famous moment in history, how a tax on tea caused a famous moment, the Boston Tea Party, and the effect that moment had on Parliament and King George III. They passed the Coercive Acts, or, as most of us would say, the Intolerable Acts. And now your assignment. Open the attached Google form and answer the questions about today's lesson. Remember, you may look back at the lesson for help, listen to information again, look at slides. Think of it as a scavenger hunt. Remember to click that submit button at the bottom of the form when you are finished. Good luck, scholars, and thanks for joining me again today.